see the world through other people's eyes. Now, empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Artifact Live, where we look at the art and science of storytelling with me, Scott MacArthur. Well, it's a lovely day. I've got my summer shirt on, feeling quite cool. Looking forward to a day with the boys this afternoon, an afternoon with the boys today, which is quite nice. Doesn't happen very often. But I hope you're going to enjoy this week's show. I think it's quite a special show, and I'm quite looking forward to it. My guest this week is Scottish writer and screenwriter Ewan Morrison. Now, I've been following Ewan's work for the best part of a decade, and it's fair to say that his work has increased with importance over the years, and his most recent work, which I'll come to in a minute, couldn't have been more timely given the situation that we all find ourselves in. Last week, though, just to remind you where we started last week, we had a great guest last week in Brett Freeman, who spoke to us about the neuroscience of story and how important it was to engage both the emotions and the reality of storytelling when you're speaking to people to try and get them engaged. And there's quite a nice link between that and what Ewan does, because you'll see that we go quite Scottish on you. So forgive me if you listen to it and you think, oh goodness, they really are speaking broad Scots today. That's because probably we did both go a bit Scottish, but nevertheless, I really hope you enjoy it. It's unusually pre-recorded because just because of diaries, I had to pre-record it. But that gives me a chance to work in the edges. To get you started, though, I'm going to show you a little video. Now, this was made for Ewan's latest book, which is How to Survive Everything. Just came out on the 1st of March, so it's still very much in the book charts, if you like. And I'll show you a little trailer. It's quite a nice little trailer. And this sort of does give you a really good idea for what Ewan's work is all about.
Human beings can survive for about 40 days without food, for about 3 days without water, for about 8 minutes without air. But they can't live for 1 single second without hope. That's what my dad taught us. He said we had to be prepared for what was coming. He said it was better to be 10 years too early than 1 minute too late. That's why he did what he did on that morning.
Quite evocative, isn't it? The little quote from Ian Rankin at the end really piqued my interest. So, but we do talk about that as we go into the interview. If you're new here, whether you're here now live or you're watching on replay, please put your name and your location into the chat at some point, please. I really appreciate it. And if you're tuning in from the Empathy Engine Facebook group, which is my little group where we talk about stories and how to create them and how to sell stories and how to sell things with stories, tuning in from there and you'd like your name to appear in the chat, please click this little link, which you'll find also in the Empathy Engine Facebook group. Click this little link, and with 3 clicks, your name will appear alongside your comments. So thank you very much. So without further ado, I'm just going to get right into this. Now, we spoke for about 50 minutes. I think it goes on for about 40 minutes after I've edited it. And I'm going to thank you, Alison. Thanks for saying hello from Surrey. Hi. I'm going to try and not interrupt the conversation, because it really did flow rather well. But what I have done is I've put in little pauses after every 50 minutes or so. So they're reasonably arbitrary. So don't think I'm trying to be smart and give you 3 acts. It's just little appropriate pauses where I hope people can ask questions and give me their observations so far. So good luck with the Scottish accents. I really hope you enjoy this. Ladies and gentlemen, can I introduce you to Ewan Morrison? How are you?
Not too bad. Look, you're looking awfully pink here, though. I had a mask on today as I was.
Right.
We had a little bed bug issue that required some poison. So,
oh dear.
Yes, indeed. So I had to get the gloves on, the mask, practically hazmat suit, outfit on. So I'm looking a bit funny, though. I mean,
you look okay on cat. Well, let me just put you on big. There you go. You look absolutely gorgeous.
Weird
you look
pink
fine
there. Anyway,
how are you doing? Nice to meet you.
Lovely to meet you. I like all your get up in the background there. It's much tidier than mine.
Well, thanks for noticing. I mean, this is one of the things I talk about is how we can use artifacts, stuff,
yes,
to help people remember their stories. Everything behind me is a story. Everything.
All right.
I mean, the microscope was when I was a scientist, and this is what I want to talk to you about. So I'll tell you about that in a minute.
Okay.
But then I talk about when that violin was made by my very good friend, who's he's terminally ill right now. It was made by his grandfather.
Wonderful.
Just gave me it last week.
Mm-hmm.
So there's all stories and actually above it, I'll show you. There's a whole load of other ones.
Yeah.
And I use them depending on who I'm speaking to.
Great. Excellent.
Yeah. So thanks for noticing. Folk think I'm just a bit weird because I've got skeletons and things behind me, but
skeletons in your closet. No, I'm kind of the same. I've got a lot of wee artifacts kicking about. We've actually got a whole room next door packed full of little memorabilia.
I mean, I came up with the idea for this because I don't normally. Well, I didn't think I was any good at story. I didn't understand I was any good at storytelling. Not in your league. But during lockdown, obviously my world collapsed because I was doing 3 or 4 events every week, and it all just collapsed. And I was like, what am I going to do with myself? And I was sitting in here. That was a bookcase full of books, obviously. And I thought, I can't just sit and worry about it because I've got friends that have really succumbed to this carry on. They've really got very low, and it's been very difficult for them. And I thought, well, I'm not going to do that. So I started to do broadcasting, and then people said to me, well, you're very good on stage at telling stories.
Right.
And I was like, oh, am I? All right, okay. So I started to think about that, and that's how this develops. It was quite a natural, the wanky word would be organic, quite an organic.
It's a terrible word.
It's awful, isn't it? Yeah, I don't like it. It's like a beautiful journey, all that sort of stuff. So
it's a sustainable vocation. There
you go. God, yeah. And if you say pivot, I'm going to switch off the broadcast.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So
that's great. And I too know lots of people who've succumbed.
Yeah.
To, I think it's the erasure of the goals in life. So everything seems to fall away. Then people lose motivation. There's no reason to get up in the morning. There's no reason to do anything.
Yes.
And I see some of the more intelligent people I know, when they lose sight of their goals, they crumble faster than anybody.
Yeah. That's a really interesting, and I think you're absolutely right in terms of that observation. I've seen it as well, and I've had people who have they've tried to take their own lives. It's been that bad. Although we're laughing at with both of people, it's actually really serious. And I don't know if I've done the right thing, but I think I have. I've got other friends who have spent 20 grand building their own studios at home and then done nothing with it. So they've gone the opposite way. They've just spent money rather than trying to create a new way of doing it, which is another, I guess it's a coping mechanism.
Well, yeah, maybe it was the goal was to prepare the studio rather than to actually do anything with it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's the thing. No, I don't think we're really kitted out for setting our own goals. It's really hard, really hard.
But one of the things that attracted, I mean, I've read most of your books in the past. I mean, I started off, I read Swung, many years ago, and something really quite weird happened. And I know it's only weird in my head, but you know how you wrote about sort of menage a trois and all that sort of thing. Well, I had this contact from someone in America. I don't know if you ever heard of her. She's called Nancy Duarte.
Never come across her.
Well, she's the woman behind The Inconvenient Truth.
Okay. She
coached Al Gore on how to present and how to get across complex data. And I've not known her, but I've had contact with her for about 20 years. Because when I had a proper job, I used to work in business as a consultant for KPMG and people like that. And she was an ever present, but she's the sort of person that looked at complex data and tried to make it understandable by the public.
Yeah. And
then I had another guy called Robin Dunbar of Dunbar's Numbers fame. I don't know if you ever heard of Robin, but Robin's a professor of psychology. I live in the Cotswolds. He's down in Oxford here. And I know you did your TEDx at Oxford, didn't you?
Oxford,
yeah. And he's the guy that came up with this thing that, we all have an ability to communicate effectively and meaningfully to 150 people-ish.
Yes.
And he's made a career out of that. I mean, he's a very distinguished and a lovely man, actually, a very nice man. And then along came your books and your new book, which obviously we need to mention it, but I think that the three of you are all in my head. I know it's only in my head, but in my head are all actually doing similar things, trying to understand, how we create meaning as whether you're an insider or an outsider, as you talk about. And I just thought, I'm going to try. So I brass necked it, and everybody said yes.
Well, it's great to feel understood. It's good to feel you're in communication with other people. One of the terrible things about being a writer is you spend so much time thinking, is this just a diary? Am I writing this for me alone, or am I communicating some bigger themes and questions beyond that? And I think you're absolutely right that there is, if you look across all the different subject matters in my books, which go from swinging to long distance relationships to new age collectives to cults to survivalists, there's always a big quest for meaning going on within the characters. They're really quite lost people who are looking for a big narrative to explain something, whether that's the liberation of promiscuity or whether that's survivalism and preparing for the end of the world. I'm really glad you picked up on that, because it's become more and more clear to me that I'm sending characters out into the world to look for meaning, to look for narratives they can live by.
Yes.
Because I've been struggling with that one most of my life as well. What's the narrative I'm going to live by? I was born into an atheist, skeptical family. Watched a lot of ideologies collapse in my 20s and 30s. So a lot of people in Generation X are kind of living without a plot, and that's a problem.
I asked quite I mean, you might feel it's slightly tangential, but it's something that again, I think, if I can even say kindred spirit with you there, because I obviously work mostly in the corporate environment, and in many ways a bit like in your latest book, where the dad, I think is it 2025 it takes place in. Sorry if I've forgotten the detail, but the father and the daughter Haley, it's a future view of what could happen. And I'm being asked more and more about that by my corporate clients, because they're saying their control mechanisms, these bloody things, and I've got a poison bottle there because it's they're sort of key performance indicators and how they control and keep management, on top of everybody. They're seeing that collapsing because people are going, I'm not having it anymore, And I think there's a lesson in your writing for the corporate world. I don't know if you ever thought about that, but because I think a lot of them really are. I mean, they always talk about transformation. They've never transformed since the wheel. They really haven't.
So true. And I think looking at the decline of the Soviet Union's. Sorry, I interrupted you.
Oh no.
Either we'll come back to your point, but I'm just to illustrate something you're saying halfway through. the decline of the Soviet Union was it was economic before it was political, because basically they had state-run corporations that just became so laden down with bureaucracy, and with a one-way bureaucracy. It was just top down. So if there were any faults in the nuts and bolts, and the doors and windows and the fuel consumption, all these things just went unreported by the people down below. So gradually these state-run corporations just ground to a halt. And I think you have the same, I see that in a lot of structures in the UK. For example, the BBC has a similar problem. It's got a failure to report its own failings. It's got cover-up, among higher levels of its own bureaucracy. And it's got astounding levels of inefficiency.
Yes.
It takes, I remember when I used to work at STV, which was a small, volatile, and for a moment quite creative little place to work if you were in arts. We had a team of 4 people, and we produced 2 hours of arts programming every week.
Wow. Right.
It takes the BBC a team of 50 to produce 2 hours of arts programming in 6 months.
Jesus.
I mean, that's just the numbers and the inefficiency that's endemic within that. So, no, I agree. And a lot of it's to do with top-heavy management.
Yeah.
And everyone covering everyone else's mistakes.
Fascinating. I mean, one of the things that, I'll probably get hate for saying this, but I had the privilege of working in the NHS a number of times when I was in consulting. I worked at the Southern General in Glasgow, and I worked in a couple other down here in England, and it's an absolute mess. The NHS, but you're not allowed to say that. No, indeed. It's just the system, they say. In fact, it's like a phrase. I heard the same expression. Oh, dear me, I lost a family member to bureaucratic problems within the NHS. And I spoke to 3 levels of people, and I got the same reply every time. It's just the system. And you could have heard the same thing under the rule of the Soviets, to be honest. I think it's a question of scale. Some things are just too big to manage, and then the management becomes too big. So I'm actually for radical reforms of the NHS, and localized governance. I think would be a great thing. To split it up like a federation would be a great idea. It's just far too big and unwieldy. Yeah, absolutely. One of the projects I was involved in, Ewan, was basically managing the operating theatres. And the number of cases that happen every year where they leave something in a body is quite scary. I'm not suggesting, and I know you're interested in conspiracy theory, I'm not suggesting there's a conspiracy going on, but
no, indeed, no.
But there is, and we went in. None of us. But I've got I used to be a biologist, so I guess I've got a little bit of scientific background. All the rest of the guys were like trade engineers and ordinary guys. And we all looked at it and went, what are you doing in here? And it was about power. It was about you couldn't say anything because the surgeon was basically, she was a god, and if you said anything, you'd be kicked out. And they do kick out people who say you're the problem. They don't like it. And who does? But
well, again, it's a one-way bureaucracy. It's coming from the top, and the people at the bottom who know the stuff, who say, I think you've left the scissors inside that lung just now, before you start stitching up. If you're at the bottom, you don't get a chance to report up to the top, and as a result, vast systemic problems start to develop. And well, actually, when an institution spends more time covering up and fighting legal battles to suppress any information, know that it's in the final stages of entropy, really. And the NHS does currently spend more money quashing legal cases against it than it does actually paying out.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
It's very, very disturbing. Late stage entropy institution. Yeah.
My viewers are going to love that. Because that,
well, I think we all know someone who's been damaged by the NHS, but we all go. It's such a great notion. We cling to the idea. What, from 1949, 1950, the principle. We love the principle, and we turn a blind eye to the data, to the emotional cost, and we think, oh, what would it be like if it was all privatized? It would be terrible. Oh, we'll just shut up about it then. And everyone's encouraging us to just shut up about it.
Yes.
But when you lose people, as I did, to a bureaucratic error, there's no way back from that. No. And I can't go into the NHS now without looking at all the systemic problems that they have.
Wow, what a way to start this conversation.
Yeah, I thought we were supposed to be talking about creativity, and here we are destroying Britain's greatest institution.
It is interesting again, though, because I mean the theme that, and I said I would talk about this guy here. This is meant to be Indiana Jones and the sort of the archaeologist with the fedora hat. Yep. Because one of the themes that clearly runs through your work, and if you don't mind, I maybe get you to talk about a couple of those books, but what I've been saying to people, because of everyone's equalized at the moment, like I used to be an HR director, right? God forbid. Yep. I'm in full recovery now, but I mean, I was an HR director. And I remember you could differentiate them, and the recruitment process was about a discriminatory process to try and find the best person qualified for the job. And it was actually quite easy, because you'd have this guy here with a PhD, you'd have this woman here with a master's, but now everybody's got everything. They're all really well qualified, and it's very difficult to differentiate, to find the best person. And I realized that the reason that I had a successful career, certainly in consulting, was I was good at stories, and I tell my own stories. I don't tell to nick stuff. I'm an archaeologist of my own life. That's what this is about. In the life, that's the memento mori type thing. Time is short, etc. Yeah. And I think reading your work, and I might have this wrong, mate. So if I've got this wrong, tell me I'm being an idiot. But
you're saying all the right words so far.
But I read, when I read that you, I mean, I don't want to do your bit, but you grew up in a hippie type environment with certain political, extremist perspectives. I think I'm using your words there. And then you've used that grounding all the way through your books. I have to confess, I haven't seen many of your films. I saw Swung. Yeah. I don't think I've seen anything. Forgive me for that. I should have researched that, but I haven't. But
no worries. It's a complex thing, and they're not as good as the books. So
right, okay. but I don't want to appear like a fanboy either. Sorry, I know that as well. But this being an archaeologist for your own life, when I talk to corporates, they all look at me and they go, "What do you mean I don't have a story?" And I think everybody's got a story. So I hope you found that interesting to kick us off. It was quite interesting that we went right into sort of current matters, and why I like that is because a lot of the storytelling that Ewan tells is very relevant to what's going on right now, and indeed in How to Survive Everything, it's about a pandemic. So he's quite, I think he's an observer, and from observing he tells stories. But what happens next is we start to talk about his background, and this is where we really get into the nitty-gritty of storytelling and how being an archaeologist for your own life can be incredibly useful. But before I do that, there's a few comments here, so let me just have a wee look at these. Thanks for your comments, folks. I do appreciate them, and I hope you're coping with the Scottish accents. Hi, Graham, how are you? The NHS have acknowledged this and now have a duty of candour. Yeah, it's whether they do something with that duty of candour that's the issue there. This is a big organisation. This is not normally what we talk about in this show, but big organisations aren't known for being very good at organising themselves. And it doesn't matter if it's the NHS or if it's Shell or if it's BP or it's Atos or it's KPMG or a big council. I think the point that Ewan was making, and from my experience, I tend to agree, is they get just too big and difficult. You've said something else there, Graham. Let me see what you've said. In many countries, you can visit a private doctor and have examinations privately at a much lower cost compared to here, and most importantly, with much less hassle, no referral needed to you. Yeah. You know what, Graham, we could probably do, sorry, it's not Graham, in the construction project, I can't remember your name, I'm sorry. You're right, but it's like a lot of these things, and I'm not making a political statement here because I just think it is a political statement. I think a lot of these things are so complex that our brains can't cope with it, and we boil it really, really simply down to things that we can understand. And with respect, I don't think anybody really understands the complexity of it. So I hope it didn't sound like I was having a go at the NHS, because I wasn't. I love the NHS. But when you're in there and you are honestly looking at it and reflecting, my daughter's in there right now and she's saying it. There are big issues and something needs to be done about it. And I think that's all I would say. Something needs to be done about it. I don't think they ever claim to be perfect, but they should also be open to criticism, which is something that I don't think we see enough of. Graham, this time, sorry, last commenter. When I did recruitment, I always wrote yes or no on each sequential CV. I then put all the no choices in the bin. Yeah. Well, there are stories like when I remember, it's quite embarrassing. When I was working at British Gas, we used to get so many applications we couldn't physically deal with them. And this is before the age of digitization. So I had a team, I was in charge of it for a while, and I had a team of about 8 people, and all we did was look at CVs and application forms. It was a tough job and very difficult, I think, to actually find the best candidate. And there are stories about other companies, not so much British Gas. I don't think we did it. It might have happened. It's a huge company, 100,000 employees. But there were stories about people throwing applications down the stairs, and the ones that got to the bottom get interviewed. I don't tend to believe that. I think HR people are much more careful than that, and have got much more integrity than that on the whole. But there are lots of different things you hear about it. So yeah, thank you for the questions. And it was a joke. Yeah, okay. Well, mine wasn't a joke, mate. Mine wasn't a joke. Now let me just see if I can find the second part of this. I hope you find it as useful as the first. Yeah. And what writers, good writers like you are, I think, brilliant at, creating something from your own story. Have I got that right? Is that how you do it? Or can you explain that process to us if there is one? It might just be random, but how do you come up with your ideas, etc.? Is it all based on your past or what?
Well, I think I was born into a deep contradiction.
Oh, right. Okay.
So I think that's often good for an artist or a writer if it doesn't destroy them.
Right.
By contradiction, I mean that my parents, who were very left-leaning, utopian. I mean, part of the hippie folk revival of the 1970s that were very much into independence for Scotland, but also Scottish folklore. Yeah, there was a kind of thing in the 70s. It was a great nostalgia for a lost golden age of Scotland. So other kids my age were listening to AC/DC. I was listening to folk music in the Battlefield Band. Who I still love to this day.
Yeah, I like them as well.
I got my head panned in, regularly for just looking like a hippie at school. My mum sent me to school with shoulder-length hair and sandals. Everyone thought I was a girl, and that never really ceased. It was just the contradiction was they were 60s utopians who would have been happier in like Woodstock, or maybe Brixton or Camden in London, but they moved to a really, really working class town in the north of Scotland, and were seen as freaks and outsiders.
Yes.
So I grew up with this terrible tension between these two worlds, the worlds I knew at school and the world of my parents. And also I saw the ideological world that my parents believed in, peace and love and equality for all mankind. And, the great anthem, which we listened to all the time, was imagined by John Lennon.
Yeah.
Something that recurs again and again as a motif through utopian thinking. I saw my parents kind of collapse, and the dreams that they had collapse. And also I saw that they didn't know what to do about the systemic problems that happened to be in my sister, which were, we were hellishly bullied. I developed a chronic stutter. I couldn't speak properly. So on the one hand, I was born into this contradiction where there were two life narratives, if you like.
Yes.
I was caught between the two. There was working class life in Wick, and then there was the utopian progressive life of my parents. And I was stuck in the middle, stuttering literally because I didn't know which words to speak.
Gosh.
From either world, So it took me a long time to work out that my quest as an artist, because I started off making art to start with, was to try to work out what narrative to live by. What story am I going to believe in? And I think I went through my 20s kind of ricocheting from very intense belief systems one to another. So I went straight from, in art school, I became a communist. I became a member of the Socialist Worker Party. And I was like, oh, thank God they have an answer for everything. It was only really when I was heading down to Skegness for their yearly Preparing for Power conference.
Yeah.
in Butlins,
Yeah.
and we only listened to 2 pieces of music on the way down. One was Billy Bragg, and the other one was some Socialist Worker Party band called the Red something or other, the Red Flag or something.
Yeah.
I thought, this is strangely authoritarian.
Yes.
It was only 2 pieces of music were allowed to listen to for like a 5-hour drive. And then someone's explaining to me that the only reason they go to Butlins is because the Redcoats have a long history of socialist working class, alliance and all the rest of it. I just thought this was just, well, I didn't stay with the communists, as it were. But, I've always been a man in search of a plot. And I used the writing of books as a way to explore the kinds of plot I myself could live by.
Right. Okay.
So it's kind of invested, the writing of books is invested with a search for a meaningful life narrative, really. So I send the characters out in the world as wee avatars, wee surrogates who go off and explore all the possibilities.
Right.
Of what a meaningful life can be. And sometimes I also say with a book like Close Your Eyes, I have to just explore how the hippie dream went wrong.
Yes.
So that was really what that was about. And, the character in that, Rowan, she's a mother who's just had a kid and realizes she hasn't got a story to live by.
Yes.
Because her mother, who was a kind of pioneering hippie in a new age community, a bit like Findhorn, her mother went missing back in the 1990s when they were involved in the campaign for nuclear disarmament, etc. So really, Rowan is a character in search of a plot, in search of a reason to live, in search of goals to set. So I see very much the idea of story as being, it's really part of who we are as humans. We need stories to live by.
Yes.
So that's really kind of in a nutshell what all the motivation to write these books is. It all comes just from that question. It's to live.
It's really, I was also in the Socialist Workers' Party, and I used to stand and sell the magazine at the top of Leith Walk in Edinburgh when I was, because you and I are roughly the same age as well, so I suspect we were doing that at the same time, Ewan. And I also used to live in Elgin, and I used to go to Findhorn all the time, because not because I was a Findy, but because I liked the coffee and cake they used to make there.
It's probably a wee bit too expensive now, I would think.
It's gone a bit highfalutin now. Yes, but so one of the, this is not how I thought this would go. This is brilliant. I thought it'd be interesting anyway, but it's really interesting that the way you're I love that searching for a plot, because I get an awful lot of that, and I always did get a lot of it in my corporate work, when I'm coaching people or working with execs, etc. But I think, and this is not scientific, but there's an awful lot of them now are completely lost, and they are searching for a plot. And I don't know if you've got any thoughts on it, but the sort of the idea that technology could be the answer. They talk about the singularity and how, artificial intelligence is suddenly going to become, a dominant force for good and everything else. And I'm agnostic about that. I think there's a big debate to be had with that, and a technological understanding that maybe goes beyond me. But have you any thoughts on the sort of the technical side, the IT side? Is that something that your research has touched and you've started to think about? Because there's a lot of technological utopianism going on. There's a lot of them talking about.
It's amazing actually speaking to you, because my next book, Top Secret, is about a tech guru who, or rather, it's about a girl who works for a tech guru who dies as a result of an experiment in artificial intelligence.
Right. Okay.
So I'm all over this one. But I always look for what's the most extreme example of this. What's the big ideology driving this whole thing? Right. And I'm like, shit, hold on. Is there possibly a utopian perspective here? Because I'm not a fan of utopia, as I've been through.
That in your TEDx. Yeah.
I've been lived through quite a few utopian experiments and done a lot of research into others. And I did discover actually that the end goal is transhumanism,
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
So there's the singularity, which will liberate us through AI, and we will modify our bodies and we'll merge with machines. Yeah. And this is really, I think this is probably the dominant narrative just now, a way of setting this really fragile, lost human species that used to believe in something called God, and now we don't know what to believe in. So we believe in something called progress instead. And it's as big as God. It fills the world, it fills the universe. It's a reason to believe, and it's a reason to get up in the morning. You think that you're contributing to the betterment of society. But there are absolute crackpots at the far head of post-humanism. I came across a lecture, or rather an essay recently, which I read, which there was a guy, he's a vegan as well, a vegan activist and a leading post-humanist. And he believes the human species should be designed, to only live off plant life, like biologically. And the next stage is that all animals in the world, all microorganisms, everything has to be redesigned so that they stop feeding off each other, because that's cruel and it causes suffering.
Dear me.
So basically, going from a natural ecosystem in which everything's evolved through 3 billion years to be interdependent, you have this top-down, a bureaucracy of utopian social planners who are going to redesign every species on the planet to bring them in line with the idea of veganism. And even more than that, I thought, geez, how are you going to do that? Imagine if you had every microorganism that was then dependent on the state for handouts of food. It's absolutely extraordinary. So but that actually exposes what the underside of the whole thing. Which is this is a huge experiment in statism, in growing the state. Total control. I mean, I think the guy's an absolute fascist and doesn't realize it yet. People think he's a utopian, and what a beautiful idea. Well, imagine there's no heaven. It's John Lennon, all bloody John Lennon. I could strangle him if he wasn't dead already. But
I mean, one of the great you probably heard of him. I know you'll do your research, but one of my heroes when I was at uni was a guy called E.O. Wilson, who is one of the great biological thinkers, and he's fundamentally an ant biologist. I mean, most of his books were about ants. And the quote that I've just put it on this thing here, this is the quote he said: the real problem of humanity is the following: we have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. And I think I see a lot of that. And I mean, one of the things that I talk about when I do my work is that I think one of the only solutions have you heard of synthetic media yet? Is that something you've come across yet?
I'll write it down.
Synthetic media. This is where the AIs, and I've worked in that sector for many years. They are now, for example, producing videos. They've gone viral of Tom Cruise, of Barack Obama, etc. And it looks like them. It sounds like them.
Oh yeah.
And our human brains cannot tell. It's impossible. It's gone. It's a bit like back and certainly when you and I were in our 30s and they were talking about. Computers would never win at chess. Well, that is now a long gone thing. That is, and my perspective on that is that the only solution to synthetic media is actually technology, because it's gone beyond our ken, to talking Scots. It's beyond our wit, and therefore we need to rely on what they call, AI, real AI, not we need some natural intelligence, never mind frigging artificial intelligence. But I think the AI is the only way we'll be able to filter out the synthetic media, because if you just Google it or look at it on YouTube, there's a particular speech by Obama. I'll send it if you want it. I've got it. It looks like him. It sounds like him, but it isn't him.
Yeah.
And if you're a trailer trash people in America, you'll watch that and go, that's Barack Obama.
Yeah.
Now that could start a war. A civil war.
I think we've got some other things on our plate which could start a war at the moment as well. I think, as you say, godlike technology. We overinvest in the idea of a transcendent that has the answers. We've really not known really what to do with our atheism and our humanism. It's not really worked out very well, and our individualism's not great either. So we tried out totalitarianism in the first half of the 20th century, then we tried individualism in the second half, and we're still lost. So It's possible that, you know, we could leap into the arms of the techno god. The only problem with the techno god is the techno god doesn't really care for us very much.
No.
So there's lots of AI answers to the problems of human suffering. You know, the simplest one that we know is ask an AI, how can you stop human suffering? And the AI comes back and says, kill all humans. No. It's a brilliant answer. Yep, suffering, pleasure, everything's gone, you know. And there's all these other AI solutions as well. You know, people ask impossible questions of AI, like how can we stop starvation on the planet? And so the AI works out the exact nutritional value of everything in the world, and it works out the nutritional needs of everything in the world, and it delivers you a grey goop made largely of sea algae.
Yes.
You know, because that's the most plentiful thing in the world. It's not an answer that we can work with. So this is why Elon Musk has come forward and said that, the way to stop the singularity being anti-human, the way that we can control AI is to work with it by implanting AI into ourselves.
Yes.
This is his big idea. I think it might end up a wee bit like most of his spaceships, you know, going arse first on the launch pad. Yes.
One of the other themes that you already touched on that I think is quite noticeable reading your books is a lot of your protagonists are female.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Again, am I just noticing something that's not there, or is that deliberate, or is that coincidental, or?
I think it's just been a period of exploration, to be honest. Because
right.
the next 2 or 3 books, the protagonists are going to be male.
Are they? Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But I think I've kind of pushed that one as far as I could possibly go. Sometimes it was just me channeling the way I could feel more for a character.
Right. Okay.
So I would go like, would I care so much if this happened to a man? Maybe that's just, you know, the inherent misandry of our culture that we tend to care for women more. So maybe to get the writing done on difficult subjects, I've gone, right, I would care more if this character's a female. No, but the next three books, really, because I've got them all planned out, are all male protagonists.
Oh, no.
You know, there's also just an aspect of the skewing of the narrative just now towards towards women and towards the feminists. Yes. That's widely seen. There was a big article in the Guardian about this the other day on the I think their language, not mine, the domination of publishing by women.
Yes.
So female stories, female protagonists, and female authors, female editors. It's been a huge big movement.
So again, we got into some specifics there, I guess, but the point that I would like to really emphasize is that what Ewan seems to do is he reflects back on his story, on you know, how he grew up, how his family, which were quite unusual, sort of hippie-based type legacy he has there, and how he uses that as a lens almost to look at the rest of his life as he's grown into his time now. And I think that certainly for me, regulars will have heard me speaking about how I, you know, have a spreadsheet. I do have a spreadsheet for this. It's really quite sad, but I've got a spreadsheet where I lay out all the years of my life. And I, first of all, I have like what I call aid memoirs, and it's just little things like, you know, a book published, or, you know, the lady died, or, you know, the big things that help me remember where I was in that particular moment. And I find that very helpful when I'm trying to create stories for use on the keynote stage, or if I'm writing short pieces. And it's quite refreshing. Now, but that might be a bubble I'm in there, and that Ewan happens to be in the same bubble. But I like the way he also demonstrates change across his lifetime. So yeah, quite useful. I'm going to pause just for a few moments, as I often do, and just give you some updates on some other things that are going on at the moment. I am running a storytelling course at the end of the month on the 24th of June. This is going to be an online event hosted by the Funzing platform, and it's called This. Now, in that, I'm going to try and explain something I touched on in the conversation with you, and I'm going to try and explain how you can use stories to help your career, because I do think there's been quite a radical shift in the levels of qualifications and the ability of people to explain their capabilities over the last 15 years. And I think that stories are actually one of the key tools that will differentiate you, will allow companies to discriminate towards you in the recruitment process. So rather than doing the funny thing that Graham mentioned earlier about putting yes and no on alternate CVs, or about throwing them down the stairs, I think we can perhaps encourage delegates, and then I want to encourage you to think about, how do I use my real life stories to help me stand out from the crowd? So I hope you'd be interested in that. It's £12 a ticket, plus VAT. So I think it's £13 a ticket. And I would really like to see you there. It'd be a bit more formal than this, obviously, but nevertheless, it'd be great if some of you could come along and join me on the 24th of June on the Funzing platform. Details are available just by hashtag ARTEFACTLive, hashtag Scott MacArthur. It's all over the place. Now, this is the final part of my interview with Ewan. Now, let me just cue it up. Let me get it here. Here we are, number 3. Now, this, we bring it to a close, but in the next 15 minutes. But you'll also gather from this, there are so many subjects that I think we could have gone into in much, much more deeper detail. And it just, for me, it shows the complexity of this whole subject, the subject of storytelling. I mean, there are many, many post-Jungians talk about there being a standard structure, and there is a standard structure in many stories, but I think the complexity of it makes it much, much more interesting than that. And I think Ewan goes into this quite well in this final section.
No, but as I say, I think I've reached the end of that. So I've really 4 books in a row that I've had female protagonists.
Yeah. How do you do that? Because I mean, standing in the shoes of other people is, stories are great for that. One of my favorite description of a story is they act as an empathy engine.
Yes.
Totally, it's beautiful. Totally. And well, I mean, I'm a bloke, so I mean, I might be talking rubbish here, but I think, like, I thought Haley was a lovely character, a powerful character. How do you do that? Because I often get accused by my other half, typical man, I get that, that off the cuff comment we quite often get. How do you do it? Is it just thinking about it, or observation, or a bit of both, or what? How do you do it? I'm intrigued.
It's definitely a bit of both. I mean, for example, in the book Close Your Eyes, there's a huge passage there written in the second person, in an accusatory voice, with the lead character Rowan struggling with breastfeeding and struggling with sleep training, as it was called. There was a sleep training manual. Now, I went through that with my ex-wife, right? And all the details of that, like, people said to me, "How did you know all that stuff about vacuum pump breast milk and like waking up 4 times a night and stuff?" And it's like, well, we did it together. We were a couple who lived through that together. And eventually at some point we said, should we just do this in shifts rather than both of us wake up in the middle of the night 4 times a night? So some of it's just lived experience with women. And then, of course, having a daughter myself, watching her grow up and her eccentricities and some of the things that she says, thinks, and does. But, as you say, humans at their best are empathy machines as well. Yes. I mean, there are actual chemical and neuron reactions we have when we see other people in different emotional states. Cinema, for example, uses that a lot. So we cry when we see people crying. I don't draw this huge boundary line between men and women, which has been drawn, let's just say, for really rather political reasons. I always think, there's the love of a father and a daughter, for example, is just huge and profound, and the love between a son and a mother. These are, it would be pointless to draw a political line and say no, they're utterly different, and one's an oppressed class and one's an oppressor, and therefore no one from one side should make representations of people from the other. Because I think primarily just in terms of relationships, I think that's the thing. All these people are within relationships.
Yes,
to do with the dynamic, and they've always got a problem they're dealing with, whether it's marriage or adultery or loneliness or unemployment in a couple. So Swung, for example, was really about loss of career as a couple, what it can drive you towards, looking for other solutions together. So really, most of the stories are about a dynamic between you know, a man and a woman, or a man and a man, or a woman and a woman. They're really about relationships rather than primarily like, you know, waving a flag for men or waving a flag for women.
Yes, I think there is a mistake that I said. I mean, it's quite difficult to have the conversation at the moment, which is, I guess, we're almost completing that circle, aren't we? Because if you say, I mean, I said publicly once that, you know, being a man is not a personality, nor is being a female. It's not a personality type. I mean, biologically, it's not. You know, but they do. There does seem to be a push from some largely politically motivated groups that want to create that, and obviously that's not. I mean, I had a professor of neuroscience on the show a few weeks ago, and we touched on this, and he said, if I gave you two brains, one was male and one was female, you couldn't tell them apart, Scott. You know, the fuel might be different, but they are actually fundamentally the same. And I thought it was quite a nice metaphor that you drew there. But I see the time's racing on. I can't believe that's been 40 minutes. But if there's one other area I'd just like to have a chat with you about, and it's, I could be completely, again, I've said this once already, I could be completely wrong with this, but one of the things when you, and I know you lived overseas for some time as well, I don't know if this happened to you, but I've been living in England on, you know, missionary work now for half of my life. So 25 years I've been living in England, and I've become, I think the word obsessed is not too strong a word for Scottish literature and poetry and television and film. Hence why I was so happy that you said yes to me, to be honest. And I think I see there's a lack, you know, the Scottish, I mean, you mentioned earlier about, you know, folklore and things. There is, you know, obviously the Red Book and all these other, there's lovely books about it, but it's nothing like the Irish tradition or some other European countries, the French tradition. Is there something that I'm missing, or has Scotland lost some of that literary and artistic culture that it once had, or was once recognised as having? And am I just blethering? I could just be blethering, and please tell me if you think I'm blethering, but I just think, well, where are the David Whytes? You know, where are the contemporary poets in Scotland that are making a difference? I'm not seeing them.
Well, I mean, if you look at the 19th century, a lot of incredible, powerful things happened in Scotland.
Yeah.
And sorry, you know, since the Enlightenment until the end of the 19th century, really. So, you know, you've got David Hume, you've got what's his face that Thatcher used to love, and Smith indeed.
All the statues in Edinburgh.
A great thinker, actually.
Yeah.
Smith's Law of Unintended Consequences.
Yes, brilliant.
Huge influence. You've got Robert Louis Stevenson. You've got Sir Walter Scott. I mean, they were big on the international stage.
Yes.
And also they were bringing Scotland to the world, and a certain Scottish mentality as well.
Yes.
There's a lot of digging you can do. And Robert Louis Stevenson on the psychology of the Scots, I think.
The American Constitution, many think, was significantly influenced by that group of people.
Indeed. So what's to explain it?
I don't know. Well, I mean, one of my I've got a conspiracy theory that the clearances because the clearances wasn't all about working class people who worked on farms. The clearances also took the intellectuals out of Scotland. And this conspiracy theory I have is that may be the beginning of the end, you know, because we recovered? I don't know, but whether because I see a lot of this sort of red hair, toffee and haggis culture down here of Scotland. And I mean, most Scots have never heard of Hugh McDermott. You know, there is I think there's a gap. I mean, there is obviously like the Scottish noir and the Ian Rankin and Val and all those people who have been amazing, but I don't think and this sounds terrible, but the smarter end, and I'm blowing smoke up your arse here, but I don't think I see enough of it, whereas in other Celtic cultures I see loads of it, you know, and I just maybe it's because I'm living in the Cotswolds and I'm living in
I think it might be something to do with tall poppy syndrome though, and I'm more down the line that we've inherited a lot of. Here's another alternative theory for you. Okay.
Yeah.
It's not so much the clearances. It's that Calvinism has an affinity with Marxism.
Yeah.
They both come from the same tradition. Marx and Engels were, in fact, inspired by the Anabaptists of Munster in Germany. That was so hardcore Protestantism, state control, solving everyone's problems, solving poverty, common both to the Protestant, hardcore Protestant tradition and also common to the Marxists. And both are thoroughly anti-intellectual. And I think Scotland was, within the 20th century, it went down a very left-wing Marxist trajectory.
Right. Okay.
Very anti-intellectual, especially in Glasgow as well. You still see support for the sort of Stalinist ideas, and actually some people still refer, folk in their 70s or 80s will still refer to Stalin as Uncle Joe.
Yeah.
You know? So I think that might be where the damage was. You know, Stalin had purges of intellectuals, for example.
Yes.
I'm not saying that all of Scotland was Stalinist, but there's a certain ethos which is to do with, you know, what we know widely as tall poppy syndrome. That the idea that equality takes on a negative aspect here in Scotland. It's not that we should all be equal up here and all be like, or up here.
Yes.
But like we have to drag those people who think they're better down to our level. And that's, you know, there's so many Scottish expressions which we grew up with. You know, I kent your father means I'm not actually going to let you go higher than your father. You know, we could probably think of a dozen phrases.
Oh, there's loads of them. They were all Jock Tamson's bairns, etc. They're all
exactly, you know, we're the salt of the earth and all this kind of stuff. And I think that's done damage to the idea that there's permission granted to the intellectual class to exist and to try to talk about big ideas.
Yes.
So we've been dumbing down since the communist revolution, really.
Fascinating perspective.
1919. It's just a hypothesis, really.
Yeah.
But something has to explain tall poppy syndrome.
You're making me reflect on, and I get another dodgy subject that I never thought we'd go onto, but about nationalism, because I grew up in industrial Lanarkshire in a council house, you know, and I was very, very pro, you know, the national identity of Scotland back then, and that has gradually withered on my particular vine, because I see, and I hadn't really framed it the way you framed it, but I see Scotland where the government is now giving everything away for free, and in the end there's going to have to be a cost. And I see it independent of the SNP. It's the notion of nationalism is not owned by the SNP, which is another thing a lot of people seem to do, because it's got bugger all to do with them. They just support it. But I now don't think, I mean, I'm now, and I don't know where I'm going with this. And again, we're going right back to that very start of the conversation. Because I, in some moments, I think, well, the only answer is globalization, but I want it to be local, you know, and I'm like you said at the beginning, I'm totally conflicted by it, you know. I can't work it out, you know, and I don't know who can, but I don't think I've got the wit to work it out. Does that resonate with you as well from your experience, or is it?
It does, and I'm drawn to the idea of anything federalist, to be honest, of bringing things down into manageable sizes rather than, you know, national identities and national states. I'm very anti-statist. Probably there's a thread of anarchism through what I think, but also libertarianism probably as well. So
yes,
but I don't think that the kind of nationalism that's being touted in Scotland now is going to lead to a productive and happy society. I think it's largely resentment based. Yeah, it's an entrenched position built on antagonism towards an enemy, rather than based on a profound love and appreciation of what we do on a daily basis in Scotland, how we exist. It's not we don't nurture ourselves enough or care about ourselves enough. We're more focused on blaming.
Yes.
Again, these are also things that have been raised through Calvinism and also through the Marxist tradition as well, which was fueled by class hatred. Yes. So unfortunately, you know, the current nationalist agenda, I mean, probably more so under Sturgeon than under Salmond. Salmond at least has a sort of love of his own culture. But Sturgeon is a sort of she's a hostile person, very antagonistic and very Stalinist in her statist. Yes. You know, her belief in the all-powerful state that's going to take care of all of us because we cannot take care of ourselves.
Yes. Weirdly, I had first-hand experience of the First Minister when she was the Health Minister. That project I told you about earlier, She was the boss, effectively. And we had to man mark her with someone because she kept interfering, and it wasn't, she was perfectly pleasant. And she wasn't horrible or anything, but she was.
No, for sure.
She really got in about it, and it was like, no, you need to let the experts deal with this. You don't know enough about this. We didn't say that to her directly, but we had to put somebody on her because she just kept wanting to be the boss, you know?
Well, you know, just to try to round this one off on the nationalists, I think the thing that, I mean, I put a lot of that behind me. I was raised in a thoroughly SNP family. My father was so obsessed with the SNP, he even supported the SNLA.
All right,
you know, So I grew up in an entirely 70s vibe of Scottish nationalism, but the hate crime bill in Scotland, the hate crime law is absolutely dreadful, and it took a lot of work from us writers and journalists, and also you know, priests, anyone concerned with children's education, with journalism, with writing. We were all working together to try to get rid of that bill, and we managed to end up with some reforms to the bill.
Yes.
And thankfully, you know, the police can't come in and look at your bookshelves.
Unbelievable.
No, but they would have been able to, had someone reported you as having suspicious books on your bookshelf.
Terrible, unbelievable.
But so there was a kind of authority. So we pulled that back. So that's not actually the case anymore. And I have got some books over there that would cause offence to minorities, and they're award-winning books.
Yes,
you know,
absolutely.
Salman Rushdie. You know, I've got on my computer. I've got the Charlie Hebdo illustrations. You know,
yes.
I've got the books of Michel Houellebecq, who you know also is in the same kind of territory of causing deliberate offence. So I think that as an indication of where the politics of the more powerful state want to go in this country is a fair indication that we're heading into some very dangerous territory.
I'm not a huge fan, but Jordan Peterson referred to it as Scotland's shame.
Right. Yeah.
I know he's a provocateur and everything else, but I think he's often wrong, but I think on that he was right. So I'd like to thank you for this. This has been magic. I would love to speak in a pub sometime, mate. We could talk for hours, but
we could indeed. We have a lot in common, I think. Yeah,
I think we have. I'd just like to. I've got your latest book here.
There you go. How to Survive.
I highly recommend it. I've found it one of my favourites of your books, without a doubt. I really, really have enjoyed it, and I think your crystal ball was working pretty well there, Ewan, when you wrote that. So,
yeah, I know. We're just seeing the lab leak theory coming out.
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
So, to finish, is there anything else that you would like to add? Where would people get in touch with you, or would you? I've got your website here. I can put that on the screen.
It's just ewanmorrison.com. Yeah.
And your Twitter account's brilliant, incidentally. I love it. I love the way you use art there. You know, be a bit of a conversation starter. I really like it.
You know, it keeps me happy. I kind of decided I was going to stop using social media as a way to argue with people.
Yeah.
And I would use Twitter for 20 minutes a day.
Yeah.
Find something beautiful or something that we've forgotten in the history of art or aesthetics and post it up and try to compress as much information as I could into 280 characters. And it's a lovely little game I play, and people seem to really enjoy it. And I've found so many forgotten artists. It's a big theme, really, finding forgotten artists. So many of the surrealists were completely abandoned, and so much art was destroyed in the Second World War as well, which has all come up through these wee explorations. So it keeps me sane, keeps me happy.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Well, listen, thanks ever so much. I really do hope I get a chance to meet you sometime, Ewan, because I do think we've got quite a bit in common.
We do indeed.
I think we could witter quite a fair bit, but
aye.
Thank you very much for being on the show. I do appreciate it.
It's been fantastic. Loved it. Take care, Scott.
Well, I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Ewan Morrison there. I certainly did. Quite an interesting guy from a number of perspectives, and I think his political perspectives, I don't agree with all that he said, but he wouldn't expect me to, I don't think, because I think the way he changes his perspective through his life and thinks about things in a non-binary way is something that a lot of folk can learn things from. You don't have to be left and you don't have to be right. You can be something else. You can take the best from them all. It's something that I believe, and I think that's what he believes, but I need to talk to him down the pub about that some other time. So thanks again for tuning in. It's been a longer session than normal this week, but that's because I had to pre-produce that little video. But nevertheless, I hope you get something out of it. Please let me know what you thought. I've got a couple of folks saying I enjoyed that. Thanks very much, Andy, over on Twitter. On Twitch rather. Graham saying he's brave, hope he doesn't live in Govan. I don't know, I think even the good folk of Govan are able to change their minds on things sometimes, Graham, hopefully. So the one other thing I just wanted to remind you of, and I've been slightly delayed for reasons that I explained last week, but I've decided to take this show into the podcast world. So over the course of this week, I said this last week, but I didn't manage it because I wasn't very well again. But over the course of this week, because I'm feeling fine today, I'm going to start putting this show on the podcast channels. I've already set it up, it's already there, but there's no content yet. So we're going to have Artifact Live, the podcast, starting hopefully next week. And I'm probably going to add a couple of episodes a week. So eventually we catch up and the video, the vlog becomes the pod in the same week, which would be ideally where I'd like to get it. Maybe by the end of the year. I don't want to do it quickly because I want to try and build an audience on the podcast platform as well as I'm doing on here. So thank you very much for joining me. I've got a few things lined up for next week. Now I'm not going to tell you yet because things have all gone not back to normal, but got a bit chaotic. It's a bit more difficult to get people to commit. But it's either going to be Nancy Duarte or there's one or two writers that I'm hoping to talk to, because like Ewan, I think a lot of us, particularly the corporate world, could learn quite a bit from these authors, whether it's their style, how they develop a story, how they come up with their ideas, how they nurture them, where they get them from, their personal investment in that story, etc., etc. I think there's something we can learn from it. And I can definitely feel a piece coming on again, and I touched on this way back, that I think the role of fiction does have an important one to play, even at work. But I'm playing with that at the moment. I've got some thoughts on it. And on that, I'll just tell you the book I'm reading this week, because I think it's worth a recommendation. Now, this chap, he's called John York, and by many, his book Into the Woods, not the play, Into the Woods, about stories. The subtitle is How Stories Work and Why We Tell Them. I think it's a more in-depth book in terms of if you know the other book I recommend, The Science of Storytelling by Will Storr. I think this one is a little bit more in depth, and he's not a journalist. He's actually a screenwriter and storyteller. And I saw him recently been interviewed on Rebel Wisdom, and he came across very well. So, I mean, as you can see, I don't know if you can see there's a lot of orange in this for me. So I'll come back to it and I'll tell you more about it another time. So thanks very much for tuning in. As I always say at this point in the show, please go out there and think about stories. Think about how you can use them, because do you know what? Those stories can change the world. Thanks for tuning in. It's been a pleasure as always, and I really enjoyed having you on the show. And I look forward to seeing you next week for Artifact Live, the art and science of storytelling, with me, Scott MacArthur. Good afternoon.